Hello, thanks very much for all of you attending this workshop today. It's going to be an information session that's been Karen Zerkler, and I'll introduce her in a minute, will be the coordinator for it. And then we've got a number of staff members that will present a PowerPoint and also answer questions that may come up. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, we appreciate all people taking the time off to come to this webinar, because there's a pretty exciting time of trying to determine water security options for our region. In particular, we're looking today at Guyra. So, thank you all for coming in and listening to this presentation and determining, you'll have questions that you want to put up, and therefore you'll be able to get some answers either today or they'll take them notice. So we do appreciate you coming. What I'd like to do is now hand over to Karen Zerkler. But Karen, just to give you a bit of a background, Karen lives on a farm in Kentucky on the southern New England tablelands, where she and her husband Craig implemented planned grazing and various other land care approaches, including multi-species cover cropping. After her environmental science degree, Karen worked in various agricultural extension and environmental education roles with the Soil Conservation Service in Queensland, Griffith University in Brisbane, and Edith Cowan University in Perth. She began her work as a land care coordinator with Southern New England Land Care in 1998 and is currently the executive officer, having also spent several years volunteering on their board of directors. Karen is a skilled group facilitator and also consults in the design, editing and publishing of natural resource management publications. So I'd like to welcome Karen to coordinate this webinar today. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Simon. That was a really nice introduction. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for participating today. As Simon said, I work with Southern New England Land Care, and that's a network of about 30 land care groups that range from Nowandock to Ben Lomond and Ebor to Kingstown. So we're spread right out across the Southern New England. Before we get started today, I'd like to make sure that we all just know how to use some of the features that are available to us on the webinar platform. So some of you may have done webinars before, some may not. So I'll just briefly take you through a couple of things. You should be able to see the speaker. At the moment, that's me, of course. When we hand over to other speakers, you should be able to see them. And you should be able to see a control panel somewhere on your screen, perhaps at the side, where you'll see the names and then a little audio tab. And then I think it's in about the third section down, there should be a little questions panel. If that's not expanded, make sure that you can figure out how to expand that, because that's where we're going to need you to enter any further questions that you might have during the presentation. To get us started though, I'd like to practice using the questions panel. So what I'm going to do is, just bear with me here. I'm going to get you to just practice by answering a question that I've got on the butcher's paper here behind me. And I want you to type your answer into that little questions panel. And everybody can participate in this. So let me just undo the question. Hopefully you can see that. If you can't read it, it says, what's your favorite weekend breakfast? What's your favorite thing to have on a Saturday or a Sunday morning when you wake up? So if you could start typing those into the questions panel, not the chat panel, the questions panel, just to make sure that you know how to use that questions panel. Okay, oh, bacon and eggs, pancakes. There's a couple of pancakes. What else have we got? We've stalled. Not telling. Somebody's saying they're not telling. They must have a favourite family recipe. All right. Well, thank you, guys. That's great. I can see now that you found the questions panel and you know how to use it. So thank you very much. Next, I want you to have a go at using the polling feature. Now, we're going to get this turned on in a second. So we're going to be using this feature for a slightly more serious question or two at the end of the webinar. But for now, let's just practice on a question that I thought up yesterday or the day before about school. Are you ready for school to get back to normal? So the poll, I believe, is now open. I can see that it's been opened up. I'm hoping you can see it on your screen. I can't see it on mine. Let's just have a look. Yes, I can. Oh, 60% of you are, I don't know if you can see the results, but yes, 60% of you are ready for school to get back to normal. None of you are not ready, and 40% it doesn't worry you. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much for responding in that way. It means that we know that when we come to the end, we'll be able to deal with that. Now, why are we here? Just a few little things to cover before we actually get started on the presentation. We're here today for a webinar, which is going to be presented by Armidale Regional Council staff. Excuse me, my dog is barking. Shush. Charlotte hasn't barked for 3 days, now she has to bark. Hang on, I'm sorry. Shush. Okay, so the presentation is going to be done by a couple of council staff members. I'll introduce them in a moment. And it's going to cover 5 main areas. First of all, construction of the 8 supply bores and the underground piping and pumping network associated with that. Secondly, measures to avoid interfering with the supplies of other groundwater users. Third, how the network's going to be used to provide increased regional water security. And fourth, how the groundwater supply could contribute to a secure yield study that's being conducted as part of the required assessment and approval process. And finally, a timeline of next steps for the groundwater network. After the presentation, it's going to be my job to support us through a question and answer session in the time that we've got available to us. Any questions that are not able to be answered in that session will be taken on notice and answered by Counsel as soon as possible via email. More on that later. So if you think of a question during the presentation, please just use that question box which we practiced with on the bacon and eggs question. During that presentation, you can use that box at any point. So a couple more things, couple of ground rules. Folks may have questions or concerns about broader issues relating to council. However, today we're only here to talk about the groundwater supply network at Guyra, so we won't be addressing any questions that come in on broader issues on this occasion. We will try to be fair in answering questions from as many people as we can, but we're going to start with those ones that were submitted as part of the registration process. If you have more than one question, we may choose to answer someone else's question before we get to your second question, and so on. Now, in my experience, it is possible to disagree with each other in a respectful way. So let's remember today to treat each other with kindness and respect, and especially during that question time together. Look, it's my hope that this webinar is just the beginning of a greater two-way dialogue between council and the community, and I see that the next step could be a much more interactive workshop, or even a series of workshops where we address questions like what's possible when we work together. So to introduce our speakers, just like to say the presentation will take probably 15 to 20 minutes. And then we're going to have 45 minutes for answering questions after that. So it's quite a decent chunk of time. Remember to please use the question box. And would you please help me welcome Shane Anderson, who is the Manager of Utilities, and Scott McDonald, General Manager of Business, who will guide us through the presentation. Over to you, fellas.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate that. Starting the program off for us today. My name is Shane Anderson, as Karen mentioned. I'm Manager Utilities, and I'll do the first start of the PowerPoint presentation, which is about to be put on the screen, and Scott will take over for some of it, and we'll ad-lib that as we go along. I'll just wait for the screen to pick up the PowerPoint presentation. It's on now, I believe. So slide one talks about our dam storage levels, and since January 2019, and everyone will probably be aware that 2019 was the year that severely impacted the LGA with drought conditions affecting not just the Armidale LGA but most of New South Wales. In slide one you can see that we've put up some a graph to show you what the dam storage levels look like, talking about regional storage levels similar to the same time as last year. And you'll notice there that today we're primarily talking about Guyra, and the Guyra Dam, as you can see from the slide, is currently full, which is a lot better position than it was in at the same time last year. But having said that, the Malpas Dam is in a similar position to the same period last year, almost to the same level, to the same day. And whilst Guyra Dam is full, 100% full, Guyra Dam is quite a small dam. One of the things that Council has been mindful of while we talk about dam storage levels in the past, Guyra and Armidale have, if you like, benefit from separate drought management plans, and then how those two dams were used and utilised. Following the commissioning of the Malpas to Guyra pipeline last October, that effectively made the separate drought management plans null and void. So during today's presentation, you'll hear Scott and I both talk about it's one region, one supply. So we don't talk about separate storage levels as such anymore. We can talk about them to show you what they look like as volumes, but because Armidale and Gaara are on the same network now, we talk about one region, one supply. So that's slide one, as you say, as I said, quite good. Slide two will show you through some of the focus on the diversity and security of supply for our customers. And what we want to try and talk about here is that resident use has always been the priority of Council. From the moment we recognised that there was a drought issue in the LGA, we also recognised that primarily water use in the LGA is 70% residential, and that we would have to make sure that we had water security for the residential use. And we initiated a Groundwater Network program to deal with the emergency that was developing through 2019 when it was apparent rainfall wouldn't top up Guyra Dam, and the pipeline was under construction but would take several months. We were carting water up from Armidale to Guyra. 46 million litres was actually carried, but we also recognised that we needed to find another source of water if there was no more rainfall or rainfall was severely delayed. So we embarked on a groundwater network, so investigating what the potential was for groundwater. Council engaged a hydrologist to give us expert advice around what the aquifers might look like in Armidale rural area and the Gaara area. And that was primarily to develop groundwater for residential water use. One of the things that probably should be mentioned is that our water use dropped significantly during the drought period when the water restrictions were introduced. and it still remains as our most effective way to manage water. The LGA dropped from an average water use of 222 litres per person per day to around 130. So the residents picked up that heavy lifting and can be congratulated for really doing the most around conservation and saving of water. Nevertheless, in 2019, it looked like the supply may not be topped up, and hence we headed down the path of the Groundwater Network. So the bore network, primarily we're talking about Guyra, and the reason for that is that Guyra has been our most successful area to find bore water at this stage. We are constantly drilling in Armidale as well, but Guyra has had some success. Initially, Council applied for what's called a 39A exemption from the National Resource Access Regulator, or NRA for short, and that was to investigate 10 potential bore sites throughout the Guyra District. And some of those bores we have drilled have been successful and others have not been. We're currently sitting at about 8 bores that have potential to supply water to the Guyra community. And of those 8 bores, 4 have potential to be turned into production bores subject to water access licenses being approved by the consent authority. Additionally to those 10 bores, or the 8 bores are actually drilled and 4 that may become operational, we have also put down 4 monitoring bores. Those monitoring bores are a direct result of concerns by the community around how the aquifers might be interfered with from the drilling process, be it ours or others. And Council made a decision to install monitoring bores so that we could then understand if there was any impact between removal of water from the potential production bores and other bores that might be in the area. And so those bores have also been put in. There's 4 of those throughout the Guyra District. Council has identified the bores, and on the map there you'll see some yellow lines, and that's the potential underground pipe network that Council is looking at connecting bores to the water treatment plant. So the bores that have been identified, the water has to be tested obviously, but subject to that, we will bring that water back to the water treatment plant where it'll be treated to the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines, and then it'll be put through the network back to the system to support residential and some commercial use in Gaara. As part of the process, Council has identified the bores which were given, which were approved for test drilling under the exemption, and we have now applied for water access licenses through the NRA. Those licenses haven't been approved or processed yet. We are in constant conversations with NRAs, and we expect to have the applications assessed by the next couple of months, probably by the end of July or early August. Whether they'll be assessed on the application volumes is not up to us, that's up to the consent authority. But we have requested an extraction limit of 512,000 megalitres, which is basically what we require for town water. The hydrologist estimate reports for the aquifers in that district is somewhere in the 64,000 megalitres, so significantly more than what we're proposing to remove. The 512, to put it in some sort of perspective, the Guyra Dam is around about 450 megalitres. So, and it generally over the years historically has topped up through rainfall events, and hence you get more than your 450 meg, because some comes out and then gets topped up again. So at 512, we're sort of in that similar range as the dam volumes. As I mentioned, final consent needs to come from the NRAs, and we don't have that, and we obviously won't extract water or pump water from those bores to the water treatment plant until the consent authority approves the licence. As I mentioned, that licence is last conversation with NRAs. We don't expect the licence for another 8 to 9 weeks, and we don't know the conditions that were placed on that licence. Council will obviously meet the conditions that are on the licence, but we don't know what they'll be yet. NRA is the consent authority, and they will make their decision based on their knowledge of the aquifers and other bores that are already in the district drawing water. It is quite a long approval process, but we do want to have the network ready prior to knowing what the drought's doing. We're still in level 5 water restrictions, so the reason we've started the pipeline network, which has been a common question from the community, is similar to the Malthus to Guyra pipeline. It was a 6-month project to get that built. As it turns out, we still had to carry 46 million litres of water up the hill prior to the pipeline being finished and commissioned. What Council is mindful of, that if it doesn't rain, the Guyra Dam has the potential to be back to dead water storage by October this year. And if this bore network was not in place, we may not be able to use the emergency bore network that we've developed. So we've started that program early. It is a risk Council is taking that, the NRA will approve the licence, but we don't want to get the licence and then take 6 months to build a network of bore underground pipeline. So sharing the load is the next slide, slide 8. I hope everyone's can see. Why 8 bores? The reason we've gone to the 8 bores is we have the 4 bores that we've currently identified as can be production bores. They have the potential to produce the water for Gaara that is required for the daily use. But we're mindful, like everyone else, that we can easily put strain on aquifers by draining a particular aquifer in one bore. So the reason we've gone to possibly 8 bores is so that we can rotate the bores through a SCADA telemetry system that allows us to understand what the drawdown is on each bore and not have overdraw on any particular aquifer. So we're sharing the load across the whole of the aquifer under the Guyra District, and allows time for each of those aquifers to recharge if that's what they require. And it provides greater water security and diversity for the town, all of the town's water supply users. So production bores, the bores that Council has drilled, and this was identified by our hydrologists at the time, was that most bores in the district were generally farm bores at probably 30 to 40 metres, and there were some wells at 5 to 10 metres or even less. The advice from the hydrologist was that the deep aquifers under Guyra had not been tapped, and that's where Council would find its best security of water. So the decision was made to take our bores to greater depths than the generalised farming agricultural type bores. So on average, the bores are around the 115 to 150 metre mark, with the top 30 metres of the bore being cased in cement to stop interfering with the existing aquifers that might be in the area. Understanding as well that Council has put its bores down as more than 400 metres from other known bores. But the 30 metre casing is to provide that security that aquifers aren't being interfered with as we go through. So obviously we are going through other aquifers when we're going to the deeper aquifers, but to stop that water being drawn, the casing prevents that happening. And it's a key measure for the program, that we didn't want to be seen to be interfering with other people's water. And we've supported that, as I mentioned, with the installation of 4 monitoring bores throughout the area, which can also provide us some data on that. I'll say here that the long-term plan is, if these bores are used and we need to be in an emergency drought situations for that to occur, Council plans to put that data up on its website for constant access to anybody that wants to see it. Just the water quality. And finally, the next slide talks about the potential for good water quality. So The initial testing of the water that we have drawn from these deep aquifers has shown us very good quality of water, which is, if they have to be used and pumped into the water treatment plant, it's going to obviously have a positive impact on our treatment costs if we do have to use that water. I will hand over to Scott, who's going to take on the next couple of slides.
Thank you, and thanks to the Mayor and Karen for facilitating this. It is our first public webinar, so there's a little bit of trial and error for us in this, but thank you for everybody for joining. Shane mentioned earlier before about the monitoring bores, and it's probably worth noting that we put in these monitoring bores after hearing from the community late last year and early this year, when they started to see the network being developed, and questions and queries about what sort of impact that might or might not have on existing bores and shallow bores around the place. So this monitoring bore, the 4 monitoring bores that are going in or are in, is very much a product of the community consultation such as this. As Shane mentioned, we intend to report this to the community once the production bores are yielding. So at the moment, there's nothing to report. There's no water being extracted at the moment. We also believe this will help us with our application to NRA. It gives us data and evidence about what is actually coming out of these bores. So it gives comfort to the regulator, and we believe will provide that information that the community is looking for. Again, as Shane mentioned before, this is very much about Council being ready and prepared and precautionary, not being reactive. This process is taking quite a period of time. It always takes longer than what we first thought, going through the design and the construction work, working through the regulatory process. If we did get into the difficult position that we saw ourselves at the end of 2019, the beginning of this year, we didn't want to be in the position of taking another 5 or 6 months to develop this network. So we believe this is prudent on the part of Council to do this work. As Shane mentioned, it is a little bit of a risk in terms of investment for us, and not having the final regulatory approval for connection and use in the water treatment plant. We believe we are on that pathway, but it was prudent for Council to get this system in place and improve Gaara's water security. And of course, by helping Gaara, we're helping the wider LGA network. So that would be less drawdown on Malpas Dam. And it's important, I guess, to cast our memory back to December last year, Christmas last year. And I want to thank our engineers, Arun's here today, and Manish. When we got down to those levels of 31, 32% in Malpas Dam, whereas the pipeline was capable of piping the water up to the Gaara water treatment plant, we found we were accessing a lot lower quality of water. So we had difficulties even extracting from Malpas Dam, pumping up through the pipeline, then of course treating through the water treatment plant. And you might recall we had higher levels normal than manganese in the water. So the whole system basically really started to struggle when we reached those levels. So remember, today we're sitting at 52%, which is very similar to what we were this time last year for the main storage dam. And then it took us, say, 3 or 4 months. So if we got back down to these low 30s, we would be in much a similar position. You know, the whole system struggling. So we very much feel that it's incumbent on Council to diversify that water source that we're developing. Next steps, as Shane mentioned, we do have we are in the hands of the regulator, the Natural Resource Access Regulator. We're the proponent. We're not the consent authority. So the consent authority, as we've talked about, will come back with conditions. If they want more environmental studies, if they want consultation with groups such as the National Parks and Wildlife, or whatever it might be, that's in the hands of the state government. We believe it'll be 8 weeks or so. It could be more, it could be less. there's a high demand on this regulator and Water New South Wales to go through approvals across the state, because much of the state is still in drought. So we're in the queue, but it could be 2 months or more. In terms of civil construction, we still aim to have ready to go by the end of June. So that's all the piping and pumping work ready by the middle of this year. We hope we will have the Australian Drinking Water Guideline clearance at that time as well. It's relatively quick to find the usual indicators such as E. coli. Those things are done in a matter of days or a week, but some of the heavier metals and radioactivity takes quite a period of time. We don't want to be like some other councils around New South Wales, which jumped prematurely into groundwater connection and didn't do that in that basic work, and found they had water that caused them problems. So we hope the whole system will be ready around, I'd say, the third quarter of this calendar year, say by the end of August, even into September, and that includes the bore monitoring systems. And as I say, that will put us in good stead for when we will be at the fork in the road again with where we could be with our storage levels across the LGA. So that's the Guyra Dam, the Malpas Dam, and also Puddle Dock Dam. We don't have a glass ball to look and see what that's going to be like. So we're, you know, as I say again, we're trying to be prudent. We're trying to look after all our customers, the residences and the commercial customers. We will always prioritise, as we put up earlier on the slide there, the residential customers will always come first. Every customer has contributed to that drop in water consumption, and our residential customers are about 46%. I'm just looking to our engineers, about
70% residential users in Armidale.
About 70%, but we've had a drop in consumption of around about
50%.
About 50%, and the business customers around about that 25 to 30% mark. So everybody's pulled their weight, which has given us a lot more options and time to do these sorts of things. But in that discussion about why we should still be on level 5 water restrictions, I would make 2 comments. The great majority of the community who give us feedback recognise the framework and the conditions that we're working in and support those level 5 water restrictions, because, as I say, that extends our day to day zero. It gives us those options around water security. It gives us time to develop this diversified water network. And as I say, I think there's good, strong support for those level 5 water restrictions to continue. It is precautionary, and when we do look at a particular dam, like the Gaara Dam or the Puddle Dock Dam, we might think everything is rosy, but that is not the situation across the LGA. And I think this region has shown its understanding and willingness for everybody to pitch in and work to those water conditions. And that will help us retain industries and retain jobs and keeping people living and prospering in our region. So Karen, thank you for that. I think I'm getting the wind up from our facilitator, and that covers our PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was just keeping an eye on the time, and you did really well, just a wee little bit over. So it's asking me, you have been there to show the screen. Okay, hang on a second. Righto, it's time to kick off with our Q&A session. I am going to share a screen with you here where we have some questions. Remember, we talked about the ground rules. There may be questions that we can, just wanted to say that there may be questions that we can answer here straight away easily, no problem. There may be questions that come that we have to say, well, we might need to get back to you on that, and those will be taken on notice, and the council staff will be able to get back to you. There may even be questions that are unable to be answered for some reason. If that is the case, I'd like to ask council staff that if that is the case, could you please explain why, so that we understand why it is you don't think you'll be able to answer that. Let's start with the questions that were submitted before the webinar. I'm going to share my screen. I'm hoping you can see. Can you see that? Can somebody give me a sign? Anyway, the question is, thank you for the presentation, I'm assuming. How are any potential environmental impacts being considered in terms of groundwater systems, interaction with surface water assets, and interaction and vegetation communities, with vegetation communities? Shane or Scott, back to you.
Shane's flicked this one to me. Some of the, I think we've answered in our presentation, in that we believe, look, there is always connectivity between water systems, groundwater, surface water. The approach that council has taken is to try and access a water system that has nil or very, very low connectivity with both shallow aquifers and the surface water system. So hence, we're going down to those depths of 150, 160 metres. The water, the bore monitoring network system will give us that evidence, and that we'll be able to demonstrate to the community that we should have no impact on shallower aquifers. So we've done that on the advice of the hydrologist with those issues in mind. As I say, at those depths, we believe there will be no impact on vegetation. If the regulator, NRA, thinks that we need to do more work in that area, then of course we will respond. So I hope that covers it in terms of shallow aquifers, the environment, and the vegetation. But Shane?
And I can add to that in the presentation I mentioned that we had identified 8 bores, and potentially 4 of those will become production bores. If by chance a monitoring bore shows that we do have an impact, council will understand that and has the ability to then switch off a bore, and we've got 4 backup bores that we can always move to. So if we did find that the monitoring at a particular point has an impact on other people's aquifers, we have backup. It's not a big task for us to then move that production bore to another production bore and shut down what might have been an impact. So that's why we went to 8.
And look, the only other supplementary remark, very quickly, sorry, Karen, is remembering this network has been developed, and we would anticipate probably only using it every 7 years or 8 years or 10 years. As I say, we can't crystal ball gaze, but it is a supplement to the system. It was originally developing as an emergency supplement to the system, and we've gone for a 512 maximum extraction, but that's not an extraction that we would anticipate doing annually. It would be the exception rather than a regular use.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shane and Scott. Can you just confirm with me that you can see the question on the screen now?
We can now.
I'm sorry about that. I had the wrong screen sharing. My apologies. Next question. Why has our dam or stock water dropped since the sinking of the bore? Both our well and dam water have replenished after other droughts. Clovelly is one of the oldest farm holdings in the Guyra District.
Can you just tell us exactly, sorry, where Clovelly is?
I've heard of it, but I don't know exactly. If
it rings a bell, I just can't picture it.
So I can answer that by saying that we don't know why a particular dam or well might have dropped in any part of the LGA, other than to say that the whole of New South Wales was in a drought conditions that it hadn't been experienced before. And Malpas Dam alone during the high summer periods the evaporation rate was higher than we had normally experienced in that facility. But as far as other people's dams and wells, no one can answer those questions without that monitoring being done or having some sort of hydrology done on the site at the time if they'd noticed it. It's probably some people's fair assumption that the council drilled the bore, so, and at the same time theirs went down, but you must put that in the perspective of the worst drought on record. So the worst drought on record might have already done that to their bore and their well as well. It can't, I don't think there's a correlation between the two until council is withdrawing or taking water from the bores and monitoring what is happening around those bores. So without the evidence, we're only speculating.
And look, can I just add to that? Remember, yes, we've developed bores, but we have had very, very, very little extraction out of them. We filled some tanks. We did sell some of that water, but it was in the few tens of thousands of litres, which is a tiny amount of water. And again, it was extracted at depths of 150 odd metres, and the first 30 or 40 of that was cased to avoid any impact on shallow wells particularly, and bores. So we did have record low rainfall. I think it was since records began, 2019 was the lowest rainfall records in the district. So every advice that we've had, there's impacts on other farms where they've seen their farm dams disappear or their impact on their wells, you know, is related to the conditions that we all experienced in 2019.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. We have 3 more questions that were submitted prior to during the registration process. Our next one is, if the region was considered to be drought-proof with the installation of Malpas Dam, even if the population increased to 100,000, which is apparently from an Armidale Council document from 2016, then what happened? Is it drought, is it climate change, or is it the development of the tomato farm? You may have partially answered this already, but please go ahead, guys.
Okay, so the question, to break it down somewhat, is it the impact of the tomato farm? Well, the tomato farm didn't have any access to Malpas Dam until October 2019. So their impact can't be taken into account there. What happened and what went wrong? Well, I guess if I was blunt, I'd say, well, someone got it wrong when they said Malpas Dam was going to cover the population to 100,000. The fact is, Council is engaged Public Works Authority, and they're currently looking at our integrated water cycle management plan and secure yield modelling. And preliminary results already indicate that the IWCM from a couple of years ago that said Malpas Dam was good till 2040 is inaccurate, and we don't have the secure yield as of now. Primarily in their experience that's come about from drought, climate change, and stream inflows into the dams that have reduced significantly over the last few years. So we can't really answer the question from, I think 1968 Malpas Dam was constructed, or 1970. I don't know what the model looked like when they built the dam, but the fact is that we've experienced the worst drought on record. As Scott said a couple of times, we don't know what this year's rainfall looks like, and we don't know what the coming year's rainfall looks like. So all Council can do is try to develop the best water security it can based on the current data which is being collated.
And look, I guess I'd just like to make a correction. I think there's a statement there about illegal bores at Gaara and the new Malpas Dam pipeline. We're not aware of any illegal bores. Any bores that Council progresses goes through the New South Wales government. First of all, it went through 39A, as Shane mentioned. The emergency provisions we're allowed to use, and these the development of the 8 bores, and our network goes through NRA, and again that's a pretty comprehensive process. So we're very closely looked at and regulated, and as I say, It's the sustainability of that network. We're governed by the New South Wales government. So again, I would just, I'd just say it's a little bit unfortunate. People think that there's a contest between commercial users and residential users. We're a utility. We provide for both, whether it be the concrete batching plant or horticulture, or a resident with one house in it, or a family of 10. So we prioritise residents, and we always will do that. But if we're going to see this region develop, we need a secure network, and we need it to work for everybody.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Next question. Just going to move on to number 4. Keeping an eye on the time as well. How many connecting pipes are at the Guyra treatment works, and how are they monitored to provide information on how much can be accessed in emergency water situations? Thank you.
So I think if I'm reading this correctly, well, connecting pipes at the Guyra, I guess that means inbound inflow water. So you've got a pipeline from the Guyra Dam and a pipeline from the Malpas Dam. The pipeline from the bore network has not been developed to the water treatment plant at this stage, or not hooked up. So whilst groundworks and civil works are in progress, there is no actual connection of bores to the water treatment plant. They're monitored by flow meters, and that information is collected daily.
So there's nothing to report yet because there's no extraction yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Moving on to the final one that was submitted before during registrations.
It's a bit hard for us to read, sorry, Karen.
No, I'll read out the question. I just want to apologise to the person who submitted this question. There is some length to, or some background information there at the bottom, but I pulled out the 2 key parts of the question and put them in bold up the top.
Okay.
Why is Council supporting an enterprise with no interest in our catchments at all and simply viewing water security as their priority? Could the community please have access to the original document between the Costa Group and Guyra Shire? So I'm assuming that means before the merger between Guyra Shire and Armidale.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
Look,
there is background there that I don't. Sorry, go ahead.
The little part's a bit hard to read, but look, I'd like to think I answered the first part of that in terms of we're a water utility. Our remit is to look after all our customers, both residential and commercial. As I say, when we are in a tight spot, we prioritise residents, and we have turned off access for some commercial users in the past, and we will always take that approach. Could the community please have access to the original document between Costa Group and Guyra Shire? But we don't have access to that. That was the previous council. This is Armidale Regional Council, and I'll just stress again, we get asked this at public meetings, we get it asked through councillors at ordinary council meeting. There is no agreement. There is no deal with that particular company and customer that's there. They pay what's the gazetted fees and charges that are re-looked at every year. We're in the process now of looking at 2021, and that will go up. That will go up in the next month or so. Go before councillors and go out for public consultation. So we look forward to people having their say. And I think it's the right way to do it. That those things are clear, they're transparent. There are no backdoor deals. As I say, we're a water utility, and that's the best way for us to operate.
And it's important to realise too, council officers don't have the ability to do a discounted deal on the water. It's set in the fees and charges. As an officer, I can't do an arrangement with anybody to help them out or charge them more or less. It's the fees and charges are set by council.
Okay, thank you. We're now to the point where we can answer some of the questions that are coming in on the question panel, on the question feature. Are you able to see what I've just put on the screen, or do I have to change something on the screen?
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Are you still seeing the PowerPoint bit? I'll just hang on, I'll just change something here. Screen of monitor 1.
I'll build Perrottet, something
Yes,
on the lagoon.
Yeah. So you can, hang on, I'm going to make this bigger.
Can't see the rest of the question.
Oop, it's gone. It's gone. Wait a sec. I'm new to this go-to meetings. I've used Zoom a bit, but I haven't used this one so much.
All we can read is on the lagoon.
Yeah, okay. I'll read the questions out. Clovelly is on the lagoon.
Okay.
Clovelly is on the lagoon. There you go. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Bill,
Thank you.
for clarifying that.
Thank
The
you.
next question for you is, was any of the 46 megalitres carted from Armidale to Guyra used by the tomato farm? And if so, how much?
Look, the best way to answer that is we've got a record of residential versus commercial. We don't break it down further than that, and say we do have a number of commercial users in the town. It does vary depending on the time of the year, the temperature and the evaporation and other things that are going on. But certainly the usage pattern that you would have seen with that 46 megalitres would have been very similar to what we see during the year. I think that was the hotter time of the year, so it might have been a little bit higher on the commercial, but it's generally around that 60% to 70%, depending on, say, the weather conditions and a few other things like that.
And importantly, the water was delivered to the water treatment plant. It wasn't separated to the water treatment plant and or any other commercial customers. It was all delivered to the water treatment plant, treated and distributed through the network as per normal business as usual. And lastly, we don't, whilst we're quite happy to say that everybody pays the fees and charges that are advertised, we don't tell anybody what other people's water use is. That's their business and it's private.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually, we are getting a couple of questions coming through. I'm just going to go to one more that's coming through on the question panel. I noticed there's a couple of people who are submitting questions through the chat screen, which is okay. We'll get to those, but it's a little bit easier to manage if you can put them in the question area. And the question area should be just like the chat box, but either up or down from where you found your chat box. So just a reminder, if you could use the question box rather than the chat box, it'll make it a little bit easier for me to manage. But our next question is, what is Council's rainfall forecast, say, for the remainder of 2020?
Look, I can answer that unless someone else wants to. But look, we use the Bureau of Met. We don't do our own forecasting. So the last Bureau of Met I saw and that we've been using is average or above average. So it's certainly looking a little bit brighter than 2019. And I think we were talking about before, the farm dams are looking better. So the overall situation is looking better. But I guess I'd make the point on all those Bureau of Mets, Gaara, the Gaara catchment, the Malpas catchment, the Gaara Dam catchment, generally sort of sits right on the edge of where the Bureau of Met sort of makes its predictions or forecasts. And look, anybody that lives up there and lives there knows that you're at the top of the dividing range, and there's not much difference between a cloud dropping over the top of Malpas catchment or not. You know, it can be literally 100 metres, 200 metres, or 500 metres. So again, I would go back to, I think it's prudent for Council to be pleased that we're seeing a bomb forecast that's a bit brighter than 19, but we have to be careful, and it's not within the realms of possibility that we miss out on that winter and spring rainfall. That could happen, and hence we take the approach that we're taking on our water restrictions and diversifying our supply network.
Great, thank you. Now we've got no more questions in the question box, but I'm going to go across and read out a couple that have come in on the chat box. There's, just before I do, there's another clarification In Shane's presentation, I'm just being reminded here, in Shane's presentation, he mentioned 512,000 megalitres, whereas the documentation actually says 512 megalitres, not 512,000 megalitres. Just a clarification there.
512 megalitres.
Yeah, 512 megalitres.
Megalitres, yeah, because a megalitre is 1,000 litres.
Yep.
Thank you, and just like to acknowledge a couple. Sorry.
It's a maximum. It's a maximum.
Okay, thank you. Just like to acknowledge that we have a couple of councillors who have joined us, Councillor Robinson and Councillor Witters. So they've been here for a little while. I've just not had a chance to recognise them. So thanks for coming, welcome. We've got sorry, I'm just scrolling down to where the next question. Here's a question. Here's another question. The Gaara community uses approximately 234 megalitres as per the ARC publications. The elephant in the room is the tomato farm that uses in 2017 169 megalitres of water. With a dam size at Guyra and Ryanda of 577 megalitres capacity, it seems that the tomato farm has been the catalyst for all this infrastructure. Would that be a fair assessment?
Look, I guess a couple of points. The dam is 450 megalitres up there, and it has been a relatively safe dam for decades, basically. I think it's had 2 years prior to this where it ran into trouble. 2019 was a year when it wouldn't, I think if it was double the size, it would have still run out. So if it was 800 or 900 or 1,000 megs or whatever, you would have still seen that dam run out. We just didn't have the inflows into it. We had, I think it was about 319 millimetres of rain for the whole year. So the dam ran out, I think it was about August or so last year. And if it was a bigger dam, it might have lasted longer. So the presence of costas there wouldn't have changed that a great deal. So again, that dam will probably satisfy the needs of Gaara, both the residents and the businesses, 9 years out of 10. But we do seem to be facing 2 factors. One is climate change or climate variability, however you want to regard it. And the other factor that was really drummed into us by the engineers is that we're having higher evaporation levels. So dams that can be full at 450 megs or so can empty relatively quickly now. So I think, again, we'll come back to we're a water utility. We provide water for residents and the commercial users, and we will always endeavour to satisfy that within sustainable levels. And again, to do that, we're now diversifying our sources through a pipeline up from Malpas Dam and the proposal with this more network. So certainly, you know, the horticulture section uses quite a bit of water. You're quoting figures back in 2017, and it does go up and down in different years depending on the weather conditions at the time. But look, we're a water utility with that responsibility. Our responsibility is to find sustainable, diversified water sources that can satisfy both residential and commercial users.
And to answer the question as well, the infrastructure upgrades are, as we've said right from the start, are primarily to ensure residential water security because we prioritise residential water use. So whilst commercial entities benefit from it, they would be the first ones that would come off the system if we got ourselves into a position similar to the end of 2019. So the infrastructure upgrades are primarily to support utility supply, but in the first instance, it's towards residential use.
Thanks, Shane. I have another question here, which I think you've possibly addressed some of it, but I just want to make sure, so I'm going to read it out. Could they please address the amount of water that goes to Costa? They cite 39% of the water of Guyra Dam, which is 69 megalitres. Gaara was sustainable before Costa Farms, let alone the expansions that are going ahead.
Yeah,
So,
as I said earlier, everybody's entitled to their privacy, and it's not council's position to publicise the water use of any particular resident or commercial property in the LGA. That's their business.
okay.
And again, just stressing that point, if we went back down to the rainfall levels and inflows of 2019, 319 odd millimetres of rain, it wouldn't have mattered who the mix of users were. We would have still, the dams would still have emptied. It might have been another month or two, but we would have found ourselves in that position. And that's why I think the water team here, the water engineers, are very focused on a region-wide solutions to our water security, and that's how we collaborate with the state government. It's not a Guyra versus Armidale or this industry versus residents. That's a downward spiral that doesn't help anybody. And I think the solutions we can find that provide a good, sustainable, secure network for everybody.
Thank you. Look, there's another question here. I'm nearly to the end of the questions that came through in the chat. But we've then got another one in the question area. So we've got probably another 15 or so minutes. So if we're happy to keep going. This next one is, water has to come from above to fill the aquifer. It seems that sustainability is the issue, and the council has risked everything for a system that was sustainable before this enterprise. And then it's repeated. So I think the rest of it is a repeat of exactly the same thing. So yeah. Water has to come from above to fill the aquifer.
Again, that seems to be, a question that is focused on one particular user. I'll repeat what I said again. 319 millimetres of rain, record low rainfall. The system, the Gaara system, was not capable of supplying that, with or without some of the larger users. It might have extended it some time. So our strategy is to diversify that water use. We access Malpas Dam through a $13 million pipeline, and everybody welcomed that, residential user or commercial user. And the deep bore network is part of that diversification. We have put in a submission for a sustainable maximum extraction of 512 megalitres per annum. We see that as being the exception rather than the rule. And it's a system that we understand from our hydrologists has about 64,000 megalitres there. And even at that maximum extraction, which would be extraordinary and unusual, it would replenish itself and recharge itself. And that's less than 1% that we'd be using in those very, very exceptional years. So we're very mindful that we have to be sustainable, and we remind all our users, residents and commercial users.
Okay, flipping back across, I've got a couple coming back up on the question panel. Wondering if the council has published hydrologist's report on deep aquifer connectivity.
We haven't published the report yet because the bore network is still in the test phase under the 39A exemptions. And until we get some sort of approval to use that water from those bores, we don't know what the information is until they go to production level themselves, and NRA gives us some sort of a water access license to extract that water. The information provided in the hydrologist report was primarily for the benefit of NRA so they could assess our exemption application. Once Council is more than prepared to release information once the bores become approved and accessible.
Okay, thank you. I'll read it out. It's come through on the chat. Have the council used an independent geologist, ecologist, ecologist to do a sustainability assessment of the aquifer? In 1902, the Mother of Ducks Lagoon dropped when Moree started a major bore for the town. Are you aware of the connections of this underground system?
No, I wasn't aware of that report or the Moree event, and no, council hasn't engaged an ecologist. We did engage a hydrologist to support the applications for the test drilling program, and that has been endorsed by the regulator to allow us to do the test drilling program. I stress the word test because they're not at production level yet. And I'll also stress that NRA is the consent authority for the bores and the water access licenses. And until we get the conditions of the bore use back from NRAs, we can't really do much more. So council has discussed this at length, and if NRA comes back tomorrow and says your bores are approved subject to ecologist tests and investigations into historical events such as Moree, for example, council is more than prepared to go down that path. But at this stage, we've engaged a hydrologist to give us independent advice to support applications that have been approved by NRA and are now being lodged as water access licenses for approval by NRA. And council will act on the response from NRA.
Can I just add to that? I'm not sure if I heard it correctly, but it's a reference to Mother of Ducks Lagoon. Appreciate reports from 1902. What council has done is refer to the draft plan of management for Mother of Ducks Lagoon, which is only a few years old. I think it was 2017 or 18. That is a National Parks and Wildlife Service document, and it is pretty clear that the Mother of Ducks Lagoon is a function of overland or surface catchment flow harvesting into that system in that lagoon. So it is overwhelmingly reliant on, well, number one, rainfall, and then number two, how that water flows across the surface into the Mother of Ducks Lagoon. So every time there's a diversion, and I think anybody interested in Mother of Ducks Lagoon is aware of many historical human interventions, leading into the Mother of Ducks Lagoon, of roads, houses, railway lines, and various other features. So they overwhelmingly have the greatest impact on the health of Mother of Ducks Lagoon. For sure, any groundwater system could have some influence, but the draft plan of management for National Parks and Wildlife points very clearly, if we want a healthy Mother of Ducks Lagoon, then we have to look after its catchment area. From memory, it was about 900 hectares around that lagoon. And again, I would just stress that we have had conversations with National Parks and Wildlife. We continue to regard them as an important partner in what we do, and we'll keep those conversations going.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott and Shane. I'm going to pull us up there. We have all of the questions that have come in on the various areas of the webinar are able to be captured. So I think we've pretty much answered everything that's come in the time that we've had. So I'm going to move us along to our next wise steps. So thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you to Shane and Scott for their efforts. I've had a little message from Simon. Mayor Murray has had to move on to another obligation, and he thanks everybody as well. So with those questions, I believe council staff are now going to collate the questions and answers ready for provision circulation back to everyone. And they are going to endeavour to do that within the fortnight. And they'll be posted on the Your Say Armidale website, and you'll be able to find them there once they are posted up. So to help us design our next wise steps, I'd like you to just provide some feedback using the poll. Remember, we answered a couple of questions using the polling feature. That's going to pop up on your screen in a moment. And this is pretty important. So please, if you can, stay with us for just another couple of minutes to answer some poll questions. Just going to get rid of some of the things that are on my screen here. And the first question is, what would be your preferred way to build dialogue between council and the community, the Guyra community or the whole community? Would it be another webinar? Would it be an interactive workshop in a community space? I'm talking in real life, so we're actually together. Or would it be an interactive workshop online, which is a bit different to what we've done today? It would be much more interactive than this. So if you could indicate your preference, that would be great. We've got some coming in there. I'll just give you another 10 or 20 seconds on that one in case you haven't found where it is. And then we're going to move on to our next one. So I think you could probably move us on now, please, Scott Green. I know you're the one doing all the tricky stuff in the background. Thank you very much for everything that you've been able to do to get us all working together here in this space online. Our second question is, in what way was this webinar helpful for you? Now, this you don't have to just give one answer. You can tick as many boxes as you wish for this one. So the first one is it provided me with useful information. The next one is improved my understanding of the issues and challenges. It answered some or all of my questions. I'm just going to get someone to mute whoever that is in the background there, please. It answered some or all of my questions. It improved the level of transparency around the groundwater issues, and it improved the level of trust between council and the community. So got some answers coming in there. It would be nice to know if you guys are seeing the little, I think you might be seeing the little indicator bars moving across the screen. Hopefully I can see them, so that's great. Thank you very much. So I've just got one final slide that I'm going to share with you before we close off. And I've got to find out, get it going. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that. It's just the final slide I was going to put up saying thank you very much for participating today. I'm really grateful and thankful that the council has asked Landcare to be involved as a bit of an independent facilitator. It's kind of what we're good at, so we love doing it. Remember, if you know someone who would like to attend the second of these webinars, it's going to be held next Monday at 6 o'clock, which might be convenient for people who work during the day. Please have them register at yoursay.armidale.newsouthwales.gov.au. You will find the details there of how to register, and you can also submit questions there as well. So we're getting a very small early mark. Once again, thank you to everybody who's participated, and thank you to all of the council staff who've had input in the technology end of this to make it all happen. I think it's worked reasonably well. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.